My name is Lois Wilson, and this is my story. The story of a woman and her art created from rubble. Art that for a long time seemed destined to return to rubble. My story is also the story of other artists, folk artists like Jimmy Lee Sudduth and Sybil Gibson, all of us from little towns in Alabama. All of us artists who used found materials for our art. All of us now gone, but all represented in a full-fledged museum that by some miracle was created in my hometown, Fayette, Alabama.
She had an angel in her pocket, an angel on her team. In water you write your name, she said. In fire you reach your dream.
I've been an artist all my life. I was classically trained in art, but then I started making my own rules, just like the folk artist I so admire. I feel more comfortable with them, with their instinctive eye, their indifference to money, with their use of found materials. From the wreckage of the world around me came my art, a large body of work that in the end journeyed its way back to my hometown in Alabama. It was Jack Black, the editor of the local newspaper, who spent 35 years of his life making that journey happen.
Billy May, please. Well, I can tell you now, you're going to love the Lois Wilsons we have in this new exhibit. You're really going to be proud of your aunt.
Billy, I believe you told me that much that you know about Lois came through your grandmother, who was Lois's mother.
That's right.
And then I imagine your grandmother passed on bits of information here and there.
Oh, absolutely. Lois was everybody's favorite.
Lois Wilson was born in 1905.
January 14th, 1905, on a farm near Fayette, Alabama. I spent most of my childhood in Fayette. There was no art interest, and I had to do my first painting with shoe polish. Little did I know that I was following in the tradition of outsider artists. Jimmy Lee Sudduth, his fingers were his paintbrush, mud was his paint.
Just put a little green in it.
Sybil Gibson, whose canvas was a grocery bag.
Lois told me that she picked up scrap tin from her father's blacksmith shop, and she snitched the black shoe polish out of the pantry, and that was her first paint. And her first paintings were on pieces of tin.
I can remember Lois saying many mornings the only breakfast she had was going to the watermelon patch and getting a watermelon.
I know what a shock it is to go to college without a single penny in my pocket. I couldn't buy a bar of soap or afford an iron. I went around the showers picking up bits of soap and had to stay on the college grounds at Christmas because I didn't have the fare home and nobody to send me a cent. So I know a little about what loneliness and humiliation is. And I know what a challenge it is to live up north in New York in my old age, with the cold weather freezing up my ideas as well as my body. I would sit in the kitchen, wrapped up like a mummy, and when the words began to run together on the pages I read, I would heat up some big stones I got from the excavation sites in the slums where I lived in Yonkers, and I would put them in my bed and go to sleep. I was born poor, I lived poor, I will die poor. In poverty, there are great lessons. One of those lessons is to recognize the essential.
Who knows a treasure from the rubble? A treasure from the rubble. A treasure from the rubble.
I remember asking my father once, "Does God have a lot of money?" And my father answered, "Not a dime." From that time on, I had great respect for God, who could do so much without a single dime.
Jack, are we ready for hard load?
Whoa, no, I wouldn't say that. But I'm sure glad you brought me some water.
My wife, Margaret's better organized than I am. Without her better sense of keeping organized, I don't think it could have happened at all.
First of all, dimensions, frame, size.
Okay, I'm ready.
She kept us on track.
You're the visionary, I'm the practical one.
Takes two.
Here we go.
Every day when I have the strength, I go junking. I find lots of treasure in that rubble. I can't walk along a street even without searching for wood, any shape or size.
Art on found objects, as it is labeled.
These are my white drawings on wood. I simply adapted them from the Australian Aborigines.
She liked to paint on sides of drawers from furniture. She'd break the drawers apart and have 4 flat boards to paint on. Wash Day in West Virginia piece. You can still see the dovetail corners there on the edges. She took a hammer and nail and incised into the wood a design to go along with what she'd painted on the mixing bowl.
I spend half the night cleaning and sandpapering, can hardly wait until it's ready to make my drawing on it. I try to make things come alive and speak in silence.
You see the 2 human figures over here with brushes for their heads, 2 worn-out brushes, and the bristles, what's left of them, are sticking straight up, making the hair for the figures. Another recognizable item here is a fan blade from a ceiling fan. That makes the body of the graduate. The very lovable cow down here is actually painted on a table leg.
These things I make or convert or assemble are like my own children. I seem to want them to go into a good home where people will really love them.
Establishing an art museum in a town of 5,000 we knew was no small undertaking. But with Lois being so enthusiastic about it, She caught me up in that spirit and determination, and together we pulled it off. My job as a curator means that I take care of the collection, and that involves more than I could tell you, really. Unfortunately, we don't have an elevator. I have to load them up on a hand truck and go out the back door and go around the building and come to the front door. But that's just part of the work. We get here.
This whole struggle to share with others what has been such a source of joy to me might lead back to one experience in my childhood when I came home from school one day, grammar school, and found my mother had thrown out all my drawings while cleaning the house. I can still suffer that moment when I let it come to mind. It acted like a cyclone on my soul.
This is our only studio photograph of Lois Wilson. This one was made in 1932, which would have been in Boston. She didn't move to New York from Boston until 1935.
Jack, give me those dates again.
Okay. These are from the early 30s. I commented to her once how much I liked her early watercolors in the 1920s and those done in 1930 in Europe. And she said, I got tired of doing those old architectural renderings and wanted to move on to fresher and newer ideas. Our work covers a 55-year period here that she painted. Our oldest piece is a 1924 Auburn classroom drawing. She had to support herself with various jobs. She worked in bookstores. She worked as a factory worker, a draftsman for a landscape architect. She was a gallery attendant and a sales girl once. And she said she had a job once that she defined as a cat sitter. She was an individualist in so many different ways.
Completely.
Unconventional. Never did talk to her on the telephone because she didn't have a telephone.
She didn't have a telephone.
No, she made do with the simplest things.
Went barefooted most of the time.
She said in one of her letters, any fool can keep house.
She didn't do much of that.
I don't like being a guest in anybody's house because that requires that I keep clean, and I just do not like being clean all the time. I am myself when I'm dirty and in old clothes. I like to have an open house and people come and go as they like, cook for themselves when they're hungry, and not mind finding a lot of dirty dishes when I've let them sit for a week.
She was in the wax during World War II.
If you could hear the soldier spirits, how surprised they are when they find out what death is and know the family has dismissed them to heaven. They really choke up and cry and say, why don't the preachers preach the truth?
Starting in 1949, she went to the Art Students League in New York with her GI Bill of Rights education benefits.
I was amused with a lot of comments in those letters from Lois about her diet.
I fry nothing. I have no white bread or sugar in my house. I rarely bake things, except in the winter when I use the baking oven to heat and turn my gas heater off. I order from the health food company by mail. Alfalfa and lecithin, brewer's yeast.
It's pretty particular.
rose
She was a
hips,
health
sunflower
food
seed, millet.
devotee.
I was briefly married, and it ended, or so my husband said, because he couldn't endure my strict everything natural from the land diet. He accused me of having food growing in the refrigerator. How I was imposed on by the male sex. My husband was outwardly dignified. He looked a lot like Woodrow Wilson. He turned out to be a cheater, a bigoted drunk who forged checks, and was sometimes brutal. And it was all my fault because of my diet.
I don't know, to be so health conscious, I never could understand why she continued to smoke.
First letter I ever got from her, she said, I've got to get out of the city. The air is so polluted, it's killing me. About 6 months later, a letter comes, and I learn that she's a chain smoker.
Absolutely, a chain.
She did drawings that had a stained parchment look to them. And I asked her about that, and she told me that she saves all of her cigarette butts and puts them in a glass of water till it stains the water. Then she stains the paper with that tobacco wash, and it gave it an old parchment look.
I was tickled then, but I really am amazed now.
The drawing is done on high-quality typewriter paper, and the wash is made from soaking my used cigarette butts in hot water. I add color to it when I have leftovers in casein.
She said she borrowed that idea from the Chinese who've been known to stain paper with tea.
Dear Mr. Black, hooray for the Fayette Museum. New people discovered, natives encouraged. I am so pleased that the museum has a show for Sybil Gibson. The thing that excites me so much, almost to the point of trembling hands, is the Sybil Gibson approach to work, and particularly the materials she uses.
Sybil became known as the grocery bag artist. You can still see the folds that were there when it was a grocery bag. Sybil gave this one the title 13 Dancers. Her technique was to put the bags in her kitchen sink and soak them until the glue became softened. Then she could take them and peel them apart out flat and put them on the kitchen table. Then she'd start painting with her tempera. She gave no forethought to what she was going to paint. She said, everything's intuition with me. One brush stroke tells me what the next one is to be.
Every painting under the sun has its value of a love letter from the artist to the world. It is the one field of endeavor in which one can be himself and dictator of that little territory of canvas or paper. Art is a way of seeing. Art is always changing. It's older than Wall Street or even the tombs of Egypt. Art is only a side dish to living, but it does make the full meal of living much better.
Lois told me that during the war that the rent got too high in New York City, and she eventually had to move out to Yonkers.
She moved to Yonkers.
They were bulldozing the slums around her there in Yonkers at the time, literally.
All around my little oasis of old houses are being built these terrible, ugly, unimaginative, high-rise houses.
She told me that she was the last tenant to give up in the big old houses. It was a part of the a renovation project, and they were tearing them all down, and she just rebelled and wouldn't move.
Beautiful lumber lies around, flung carelessly everywhere. I'm a disposable artist, living in a disposable city, surrounded by disposable things.
There's a treasure in the rubble, you can find it. There's a treasure in the wasteland left behind it. You measure all the moments on a broken wheel when you're carving love from the pain you feel. There's a treasure in the wreckage all around you. There's a treasure that would call out till it found you. Remnants of all those thrown away. Who knows? A treasure from the rubble. A treasure from the rubble. A treasure from the rubble.
My own work on the rescued wood has opened up a whole new concept for me. I'm doing things now that never would have occurred to me if I had stuck to paper and canvas. I dread to go to bed, which seems like lost time almost. I rise at 4 in the morning and go to work, nap, food, more work. Many times I and my companion radio go on all night long working while the rest of the world sleeps. I hope you'll like the owl. Made from the end of an old bench support I found and cut away the rotted part.
Lois decided to kick out of her head everything she'd been taught about art. She wanted to get back where a 6-year-old child begins, with no self-consciousness, with no fear of what reaction it might get from an audience.
I no longer will allow myself to be a ditto artist, copying other artists' concepts and styles. As with folk artists, whatever I draw or paint from now on will only come from the inner realization, never from the flashy outward showing of what the world around me will accept.
She had that same spirit about her that folk artists have. But to be accurate about it, she does not technically qualify as a folk artist because she had a great deal of art education in Boston and in New York.
It just takes practice to learn the skills, but it takes the soul to make the artist.
Hey, Jimmy Lee.
How you feeling?
I hadn't been over in a while. Have you been doing all right?
Oh,
I hope so.
Go on. Train.
Jimmy Lee Sudduth, a real and instinctive artist. That dear sunshine man, so free of evil and greed. I never saw anything half as exciting as the wonderful things I found in the outer walls and leaned against the fences and trees at Jimmy's house in Fayette. What a marvel, right in my hometown. Look him up, encourage him, give him a show.
Now this train, or the Frisco train, is on the Winterfield track. Listen at it. Careful the mud.
Sort of the definition of folk art is self-taught art. Jimmy Lee Sudduth taught himself. He's never studied art at anybody's school. Academia began looking at folk art and applied the name outside art. You would know that if someone named it outside art, it was the insiders who named it.
I'm gonna cut his eyes right here. Make his eyes. There, that's how it's going. His mouth.
He started out just picking up scraps, anything he could find to paint on. You know, you might take out of a trash pile. New York skyscrapers just happened to fit a full 6-foot 8-inch door. I heard him tell someone once, he held up his finger and says, "This paintbrush will never wear out."
Oh, yeah.
Originally, Jimmy Lee got most of his mud up and down the railroad track. Take his shovel and bucket and take it back home and turn it into paint. This is a turtle, and you notice that it has a real heavy buildup of mud. Impasto style of painting, it's known as.
I did this when I didn't have no money to buy paint wood. I got mud.
He knows where to find 36 different colors of mud, ranging from blue, white, or red or brown. He was working at a molasses mill when he was a kid and spilled some of the syrup on the ground, and he just sort of accidentally thought, well, that's sticky, and I could mix that with my dirt and it'll stick to a board, so he did it. For years and years, he used sugar with his dirt and mud, but he didn't tell anybody, especially didn't tell his wife, Ethel. Ethel used to wonder, how could we use so much sugar?
My mother used to say, "Don't worry, you never know the luck of a lousy calf. It may turn out to be a good heifer in the spring."
Jack, look at that. Isn't that typical of Lois with those elongated bodies?
It is, dear, but we're measuring.
Oh, I forgot. I just temporarily had a little lapse.
Arithmetic.
Okay, now I'm going to measure, and it's going to be exactly perfect.
11 1/4.
Maybe.
What an achievement. Okay. Lois Wilson entitled this piece Art Lover. Actually, it's another example of her having fun, taking some friendly pokes at high society people.
If only people could get it out of their head that art is for the rich only and is a luxury separated from the common man's life.
Here we have another Lois Wilson. This is tempera on paper, and the paper is mounted on a fabric. She said she couldn't afford frames. She borrowed the idea from the Chinese, and she called this a scroll.
24 and a half.
No. This has to be even with the end ear.
Oh, Jack, life is an approximation.
Dear Sybil, your paintings on grocery bags and old newspapers are like an answer to my last 25 years of struggle against a tidal wave of American wasters.
Sybil started painting on sheets of newspaper. This painting here with 3 faces, if you look closely, you can see through the paint and even read the headlines in the paper.
That's the way she continued to paint in spite of offers from everybody to furnish her with good watercolor paper.
When she started the painting, she didn't want to think about this piece of paper cost 30 cents. She said she felt like she wanted to be totally free. That's not a white picture frame, it's the foot of a baby bed. Another example of art on found objects, this Sybil Gibson is painted on the head of a baby bed. Typical figures in the painting, the little girl with a fluffy, ruffled skirt. And about 15 faces are on this piece of an old guitar case.
Monday, I don't even know the date, April 14th, 1969. Dear Mr. Black, I came home from collecting junk, too late to get this letter in the mail today, but I shall rush to the post office early tomorrow morning. Tonight, I'm so weary that I cannot coordinate. Most sincerely, Lois Wilson.
Corresponding with Lois for about 10 years or more, starting in 1969, was one of the great experiences of my life. Thoroughly enjoyable. She was a good writer, and her mind was most interesting.
I love wood and can almost feel the pain felt by a slaughtered tree when I, like any old female tramp, go searching in the vacant lots where people dump unwanted and wasted things. You should see my flat. It is so cluttered with lumber, paintings, wire, old bicycle parts, even sewer grills I picked up from junk thrown in the streets and lots and houses. My bathtub is filled with lumber.
She enjoyed finding a use for discarded items. It fed her sense of preservation and conservation. And I'm very happy that I saved that first letter and the last one and all those in between for anyone else to read and enjoy.
Lois had an unusual religion. It was unusual at the time and for this town of Fayette, small town, and for her family. She was what she called a spiritualist.
Where my ideas come from spirit artists, of course.
I sure hate to tear it down.
Oh my, it's gone.
Long before I ever even thought of spiritualism, I had a breakdown. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face of a man all covered with smallpox sores. It almost drove me to jump off a Boston bridge into the Charles River.
She had classes with a very wealthy young lady from New York. That young lady's father sponsored them a year of study in Europe.
There was something about that girl's death that was the mysterious spiritual nature.
A knocking at the door. It was a medium I had been consulting. He told me there was a blonde girl 6 inches taller than me standing near me, and she had a rope around her neck. He said she had hanged herself. He added, "Your own depression over the death of your best friend attracted this other spirit." Then he asked, "Your friend got killed, didn't she, the girl you went to Europe with?" "Yes." He whispered, "The blonde girl rang the elevator but didn't wait for it, walked down the stairs into the basement, and hanged herself to the steam pipes. Her spirit has attached herself to you, but I'm a stronger magnet than you are and will pull her away. Otherwise, you might commit suicide yourself. And in spite of losing your best friend, you have a lot to live for and a lot of work to do."
Billy, you were talking once about an experience you had in Coleman, I believe, Coleman, Alabama.
Her uncle, Joe Shelton, was buried in Coleman. I took Lois to the cemetery to see his grave. She communicated with Joe, and I just went off to the side, and I really didn't want, I don't know exactly the details, but anyway, she was quite pleased with her communication with Uncle
That's
Joe.
Right.
So let people laugh at me and my spirits. I can never doubt what I've experienced, and on my own right here in this apartment, I've had visits from spirits, seen them, heard them call my name, and been healed by them. And I say further that if people, all people, don't spiritualize themselves, there isn't much hope for the world.
I have to give Lois credit for opening my mind to some extent. She talked about things I'd never given serious thought to before. Her letters led me to take seriously the possible threats to our environment. She was very concerned about the environment, about wastefulness, about pollution, and she had a much broader outlook on the human race than I had before corresponding with her. She looked upon human creatures as being global.
Slaughter of the forest, killed all the buffalo, plowed up the prairie grass, polluted the rivers, lakes, and sea and air, smothered Mother Earth with concrete.
She took a broader look at life from the standpoint of time. And Lois always did take a longer look at things, thinking in terms of other generations, later generations.
Why did you not let us share every part of our land? We had great spirit wisdom to share with you.
She borrowed something I read about the American Indians. They try to think in terms of what effect will it have, what benefit or what harm will it be to 7 generations after me.
That's a polecat, boy. Get them dogs away from now. Hey, you. Look at my eyes, boy. That's a polecat. I can't understand a polecat, can you?
Is he an Indian chief?
I got that Indian on my mind, looking better all the time. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now.
Tell me, you have Indian blood in you?
That's right.
He remembers getting lost temporarily from his mother, who was out in the woods collecting herbs and such. She was a medicine woman. He said, I must have been no more than 3 years old. He chose to name this Indian Pearl Bailey. And if Jimmy Lee says it's Pearl Bailey, I'll accept that.
Whoever was begotten by pure love and came desired and welcome into life is of immaculate conception. None knew that when I was born. The human race does not yet recognize the sacred duty of parenthood.
It's safe to say she did not have a happy childhood.
Her father was an alcoholic.
My parents were poor, quarrelsome, negative, sick, and Daddy often stupid with liquor. I had to go live with my maternal grandparents when Mama had her 3rd child because there just was not enough to eat. Coming home from school one cold winter afternoon and finding my mother in tears, and she said to me, I'm going to have another baby, and child, we can't afford it. It's all I can do to feed and clothe you and your brother and your sister. I remember hating my father for his lust and lack of responsibility, and I put my coat back on and I went to town to see the family doctor and ask him to give me something that would bring about a miscarriage for my mother.
Their father was good until he started drinking, and then he just went crazy. He'd get on one of those binges because he'd get the gun, and oh yes, he was dangerous.
Threatening to kill us all, and we had to hide the gun shells in the flour sack to keep him from killing us.
I think that influenced Lois's leaving as soon as she could.
Call your mama. You better call her. What's the matter with you?
Lois did not come home when her mother died, and she was very fond of her mother.
If I'm remembering correctly, she was not able to come to her father's funeral either.
She didn't come to her father's funeral, and that would be understandable.
One night when she was painting, a long, long time ago, the music just stopped playing on her radio. A dark voice stabbed the silence. She listened to him say, they're tearing down old Yonkers, wasting us away. She laid down her paintbrush, she stood up and she cried. Red and yellow, green and blue, the colors in her dye. She reached into her pocket, her heart began to race. She wiped her tears and wondered, a smile came on her face. She had an angel in her pocket, a pocket.
Well, I've come back to help again.
All right.
This has gotten to be a habit, a bad habit.
We'll be through by the time the Bridge Club kicks off this
Well,
afternoon.
I can't be late because you gotta have certain numbers, you know. Well, I'll find these.
All right. Margaret, you remember the one and only time we had the privilege of meeting Lois Wilson face to face?
I'll never forget that. It's just as vivid today as it was 30 years ago. When she came in, I was really somewhat surprised. She was so tiny. She came into our house. I said, "Lois, I really like that dress you have on." She said, "Well, I'm glad you do." She said, "I paid 50 cents for this dress, and at that I'm better dressed than most people in New York."
I get my clothes from the Salvation Army, and every month I live so modestly that I save $11 out of my $100 Social Security check.
Looking better all the
Looking
time.
better all the time, man. That's all. They're looking better all the time. Looking better all the time. I got that in on my mind, looking better all the time. All right, we're gonna put a little red around the edge and make it look kind of pretty on the inside. Come around a little red like this.
Jimmy Lee's used flour with his mud to make it look like white paint. He's used coffee grounds for sake of a dark color. He's put axle grease with the mud. He can get green on the board by taking pine needles and hitting them with a hammer against the board.
That looks pretty good, don't it?
Once, I think the most inventive moment I know of, I was down at his house one day and he was painting and he says to himself, "I'm going to just make it real dark down here at the bottom," and he cranks up the lawnmower and takes the board and holds it up to the exhaust pipe of the lawnmower and smokes it black on the bottom.
Like that, like that. It's gonna be all right. It's gonna look pretty.
Jack, where does this go in the flat file?
Okay.
I finally got a trench cleared through my flat.
A lot of it just looked like junk.
Most of my relatives scoff and feel I am completely mad.
Old pieces of board and old
Scraps of
toilet
office.
seats and metal things.
I don't give a damn what they think of me and my rocks and bottles and jars of nails, screws and drawings and machinery parts.
She said, "You know, I really just have an aisle that you can walk through." She had stacked them, I think, everywhere they could be stacked.
If it were not for crazy artists, writers, musicians, the world would have no art or poetry or music.
She was an outsider, she felt, and she had
Yes.
no love for the established art world. She said that you can't get anywhere in the art world without that seal of approval. Many of her pieces of art have something pasted on down in the corner. It just might be something that she tore off of a tomato can or a logo for a company.
Often I cut them off paper bags, turn them upside down, and paste them on. It makes them harmlessly official.
Anti-materialistic, I have called her. Is that correct?
That would be a perfect description.
The dealers in New York buy paintings at starvation prices, shelve them till the artist dies, and then cleans up on the bones.
She wouldn't sell a thing.
She's telling me she'd had a lot of people to try to buy artwork from her up in New York and Yonkers. And she said, "No, it's not for sale."
I want my work seen, but I don't want to go through commercial art galleries and art dealers. My art is not for sale.
Oh, follow me to the river. Oh, follow me myself and I. Oh, follow me to the river. Hot dog burger and a slice of pizza pie.
Lois Wilson did an entire series that she labeled American Icons.
Some of them deal with my religion, and others are the pointing of the finger at some of America's faults.
The title is Torture, and I know the feeling. She had a sense of humor, and it came out in much of her art, and some of them make you laugh out loud. Many of them are serious as serious can get.
They're like the religious paintings of old Russia, but concern those things that only concern America. The one I'm working on now is hot dogs, hamburgers, pizzas. It's a white drawing on a panel of mahogany with about 17 figures in it. Servers in their white coats, and a grubby bunch of fat women with baby carriages, long-haired kids, toothless old men, and that inevitable poisonous tanks of bilious, green, synthetic, pink, and orange drink jars. In this hot dog and hamburger world, it's difficult to arouse interest of people in anything but what they can eat, wear, and show off in.
Hot dog burger and a slice of pizza pie.
She went through a phase of wanting to build underground houses. She sent to me, maybe a dozen of her ideas what we ought to be doing to build underground houses.
She sent me sketches of
Did she
those,
send
too.
you those?
March 21st, 1969, Dear Mr. Black, I wish I had a cave with a skylight, which would shut out ultraviolet rays. Fireproof and cyclone-proof. The temperature would be even, which is pretty important for paintings. I often imagine keeping all my art in one safe place, and I call that my cave dream.
Her landlady was constantly saying that she had to clean some of the paintings out.
Lois feared that the worst would happen, that it would be discovered that all these combustibles are in an apartment house in Yonkers and would be a real fire trap. And the fire marshal would empty the apartment and have it loaded up and hauled out to the Yonkers dump and stick a match to it. I think she could see the smoke rising off her lifetime's work out there in the dumps.
The footsteps came down the stairs and there was a knock on my door. It was the landlord. He came in and sat down. He asked permission to smoke his cigar. He said his wife was fearful that I will have a fire with all this wood in here. The fire department would literally throw it out on the street if they knew. My landlord. He set his big eyes on me.
Okay.
All right, here we go, the other direction. Are you ready?
Ready. Lois depicted the ravages of old age in several pieces. She spent some time in nursing homes, in and out, the last few years of her life. And she would go back home and paint the memories of some of the people that she saw there.
It was almost curtains for me, and after 2 weeks in the hospital, I was unfortunately persuaded to come into the damned nursing home, which is a polite term for a jail and very expensive. They force you to pay for laundry. You're not allowed to wash out a slip or a nightgown in the rooms. They charge for every conceivable thing. Eyeglasses that you can't see with, hearing aids that you can't hear with, and they give you every imaginable test to run the bill up. And oh my God, the food. The food is awful. All white bread, tons of white sugar, omelets cooked in kerosene, canned and syrupy fruits, and they must have a poultry farm on the side. They're feeding eggs every morning, even to severe stroke cases. I'm fighting to go home, but can't tell how I shall succeed yet. They hold my bank book, and they try to make you sign every sort of contract. I'll get my bank book back, and then I'll demand an itemized bill before I pay anything. I'm going to turn duplicates over to my New York congressman to let them see what a lousy racket this whole thing is. I miss my radio, my ear to the world. I worry about what's happening to my art while I'm here at the nursing home. 3 young men broke into an apartment in my house. My doors, both front and back, have fresh chisel marks. My doctor says I can't leave the nursing home till spring, and I told her I would do a streaking job right down Broadway if she tried to keep me here that long.
The title of this painting is The Healer. I mentioned to her in a letter how much I liked it, and she wrote back and said, I cannot remember that painting. She told me that she was in a coma for 17 days at one time, and her memory was not good thereafter.
I don't want to get so attached to anything material that I will be earthbound by it. I really do want to get all my worldly goods in other hands before I leave off with fleshing. I've approached the University of Alabama, and they're not interested. No one wanted to know anything I had to say or cared a damn about what I was trying to do. I wept one day when I saw a piece of art I loved being used as a rain break on a broken window after the artist had died. I hope there is someone who will try to keep my collection all together and not let human buzzards cart it off mouthful by mouthful. I contacted my old high school teacher in Fayette, and she put me in touch with Jack Black. He was the manager of the local radio station and founder and editor of the local newspaper. Although he'd never been involved with museums, he wrote me that
If you want to give the city of Fayette part of your art collection, I will do my very best to make the most of it and to keep it intact, and we'll find a place for exhibiting.
each one born on earth is indebted. However little I have, I use this way to pay off a part of indebtedness I owe to the town I love and to the boys and girls of the present and future who may come to appreciate it. I've made up my mind. I want my collection to go to Fayette. June 1969, dear Mr. Black, the truck has just left. The art is on its way. It's now in your hands. Sincerely, Lois Wilson.
By the time that truck arrived from Yonkers, we had built up a lot of excitement and anticipation. Crate by crate, we started opening them, and that was an unforgettable moment to open those crates. No child at the Christmas tree's been more excited than we were.
Part of the excitement was that the crates contained not only my own work, but also the work of other artists. I bartered and bought from all over the world. Ken Moore of London, Isolde Chapman of Brazil, a rubbing of an American tombstone in Vermont, the early period work of Helliker. I bought because the artist needed food. I bartered because the artist needed encouragement. This is accumulated material, 40 years of attempting.
She swapped for this painting, gave one of hers for the artists by the name of C. Hill Smith. But she swapped her painting for his in 1935. It was 34 years before the museum opened, but that's how long she held on to her dream of a little art museum back home down in Alabama.
The African hunting shield. The people had nothing but material in their own environment to make their colors. The bark paintings of the Australian Aborigines can suggest what may be done without paper or canvas and with ground earth mixed with orchid juice and applied with sticks.
We didn't know how many pieces we had in the collection until it was cataloged, and it took 5 months to catalog it. I have something good to tell you.
What?
We finished the Lois Wilson work.
I cannot believe it. I thought it would never happen in my lifetime.
Well, that's just 2,600 pieces.
Oh.
Keep your air pure, your rivers clean. I am coming to Fayette someday.
She said she wanted to give people the opportunity to see the lifetime efforts of an Alabama cotton picker who refused to give up.
You, Mr. Black, are a very rare man. I doubt that I could find another 100 like you in the whole United States. You took a chance on the art angle, and you're the kind that makes heaven smile.
Certainly a red letter day for Lois Wilson was November 30th, 1969, the day that the museum opened.
I recently bought a National Geographic map of Alabama, and I want you to find Fayette, Alabama on this map and tell me what you see.
Fayette, and in red letters, Fayette Art Museum. I can't believe it. That's tremendous. I'm really proud of that. Billy, the only time that I met Lois face to face was she came down one Saturday to see the museum that she's responsible for having founded. And she didn't bring her glasses.
Oh,
Had a hard time seeing that day.
Lois was something.
Oddly enough, the museum sitting right here where we are is the old grammar school. And one of her letters, she said, the old grammar school hill would be a perfect place for me to build an underground house, which is right across the street now.
A museum to me is not a cemetery of paintings. It is a live thing. It grows and grows with healthy interest. And you, Mr. Black, have made it all happen, expanding the collection to include many fine artists and folk artists, such as Sybil Gibson, and of course, Jimmy Lee Sudduth.
In 1971, we gave Jimmy Lee Sudduth a one-man show. It was a tremendous success.
Make me so happy, make me happy as a bird.
Is he famous?
In the 70s, the Birmingham Museum of Art gave him a one-artist show. In 1976, the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. staged a folk art show. They invited 2 artists from each of the 50 states, and Jimmy Lee was one of the 2 from Alabama.
You wanna go home? We ain't gonna go now, we're gonna hang around a little while. Yeah.
I hope the record of my aesthetic travels will at some time inspire others. It is a record of a kind of the 20th century and all the blessings and complications this fast-moving age has brought. I saw the automobile, the airplane, the submarine, poison gas, and the hydrogen bomb all born in my lifetime. I have lived through a big depression and world wars that never stopped, just lulled. Believe me, Mr. Black, man will never solve his problems with just intellect.
Lois lived in Yonkers in the slums until she died in 1980 at the age of 75. Lois Wilson's death was not entirely unexpected. She had been in poor health. She had been in and out of the hospital. Lois's ashes are buried here in Fayette at the city cemetery. The marker says Private Lois Wilson. The reason for that is that it was something that's given to veterans, and no elaboration, just Private Lois Wilson, date of birth, date of death. Lois said once that we should all strive to be something more than mere tubes for food.
We're more than bellies and reproductive machines and intellects, no matter what the scientific arguments support. All that will last and speak to the future will be the art forms, good and bad.
She had an angel in her pocket, a pocket rudely torn, a dress she picked up secondhand in a town that's rough and worn. She had an angel in her pocket, an angel on her team. In water you write your name, she said, in fire you reach your dream. She stormed as Yonkers crumbled, but even in her rage, her love had no limits, and her soul had no age. The inspiration called her, who knew how far she'd go, but the sun was shining brighter, and the moon had a softer glow. She had an angel in her pocket, a pocket rudely torn, a dress she picked up secondhand in a town that's rough and worn. She had an angel in her pocket, an angel on her team. In water you write your name, she said, in fire you reach your dream. In water you write your name, she said, in fire you reach your dream.
And what are we gonna make now?